He wouldn't hesitate to speak the truth to the king if Otto Hightower was still at hand.
You cannot say, my queen, that your father would be impartial in this matter.
No, but he would be partial to me.
Hey guys, Pete here. Now that is a time jump. It seems like we jump forward about 10 years based on the ages of Alicent's children. It's a little hard to pin it down exactly because the timeline has shifted a lot of things around, but we've gone so far into the future that it wouldn't make sense for the same actors to portray these characters anymore, and there is a lot in this episode to signal that things have changed since we last saw them. The fact that this is Rhaenyra giving birth to a child is somewhat out of line from her thoughts on pumping out heirs when she was younger, and then there's the issue of her husband not being interested in bedding her, and the whole thing with Criston Cole at the end of the last episode that led to him switching sides. It's a lot to take in, and in some ways it does feel like they skipped over a lot of the questions that were hanging over the last episode's ending. However, I'll remind you that we're still essentially in prologue mode, and that there's a lot of setup they have to do before we get into the central conflict in the story. And in episode 6, they got to work on doing that. One thing that is very promising is right out of the gate, I think they established that Emma Darcy and Olivia Cooke are Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower. I don't have anything to point to where the showrunner said that they hired them first, but considering that these two actors are very important in carrying the show for its duration, it makes sense to me that they were hired and then Millie Alcock and Emily Carey were chosen to play younger versions of them. This opening sequence serves to not only introduce them, but to showcase their talents and squash any concerns about the transition. Rhaenyra's first shot plays like a oneer, where she struggles through childbirth and then immediately receives this request to see the newborn from the queen. The way Emma Darcy cycles through these emotions effortlessly lets us know that the role is in good hands. That Rhaenyra decides to get up and take the child to the queen herself underlines the animosity that has grown up between these two women in the decade we didn't see them. The first time I watched this, I thought Alicent was actually asking Rhaenyra to do this, rather than just having someone else bring him to her. But then I realized this is the princess making a choice to power through so that her stepmother doesn't have the chance to pass judgment on the situation behind her back. And again, the actor does a great job of conveying just how difficult this is, and the blood on the back of her dress and the way it trails behind her when they leave the queen's chambers is a nice touch to drive that home. The queen wants to see the child because her first two didn't resemble their father or mother, and that raises some questions. We'll see later that they're fair-skinned and have dark hair, which leads to everyone thinking that Harwin Strong, who we'll see spends a lot of time around the princess, is actually the father. And you might think, well, what does that matter? If they're all adults and all on board with what's happening, what harm is there in her taking a lover and having kids outside of her marriage? Laenor claims them as his own, and if she wasn't the heir to the Iron Throne, that would be fine. But because she is, this puts everyone, including those children, at great risk. It's one of those things where you're like, I really wanted to root for you, but you're making it really difficult, and they're not even discreet about it. It's true that it shouldn't have to be that way, but you have to keep in mind that it is that way to keep people like her family in power. She is one of the primary recipients of a ton of privilege because that rule is in place. If you're having a hard time wrapping your head around it, then think about what Viserys told his daughter when they were talking about whether the rumors about her and Daemon at the brothel were true. The truth doesn't really matter, only perception. Look at everything that was set into motion in the original series based on the idea that Cersei's kids weren't Robert's. The seed is strong, remember that? And even though Viserys chooses in this case to totally pretend that perception doesn't matter, we see that it absolutely does. Her third son will be named Joffrey after Laenor's dead lover, and he gets a snarky comment from the queen who tells him to keep trying and maybe someday he'll get one that looks like him. Tragically, we don't get to spend too much time with Harwin, but it's made clear that he's the father, and for what it's worth, they do seem to have real feelings for each other, rather than him just serving as their surrogate. You get a clear sense that he loves the boys in the training scene in the yard where he beats up Criston, and some hint about his feelings for Rhaenyra when his father calls him out about it as she listens on in that stairwell. The book never really fleshes out their relationship, and I think it's fine for the show to take the same route because in the end, I suppose what matters is that their children look like they could be bastards in a system where that could call her right to rule into question. Her older sons, Jacaerys, aka Jace, and Lucerys, aka Luke, are on their way to becoming Dragonriders. We see them present a dragon egg that they picked out for their new little brother, and this is part of a tradition that the book hints started because Viserys wanted to prove to the realm that his grandchildren weren't the bastards they appeared to be. A dragon egg would be put in their cradles, and when it hatched, it would be proof that they were true Targaryens, which doesn't exactly make sense since his children with Alicent, who are also half Targs, can ride dragons, but that is how the tradition of them all getting cradle eggs started. That's why Jace had a hatchling that he grew up with, and Alicent's second son, Aemon, didn't. And we see the former getting to know his dragon Vermax, and the latter being upset that he doesn't have a dragon of his own yet. His brother and half-brothers play a trick on him with the pink dread, and he makes his way underneath the dragon pit where he's almost roasted by an older dragon named Dreamfire. It's too much to get into here, but some of them claim dragons that don't have riders, and some have an egg in their cradle that hatches and they grow up together. In this scene, you get a sense of the bonding process with the hatchling, and come away knowing that not having a dragon is a point of contention between Aemon and the other boys. There's a quick introduction to his sister Helena, who we last saw as an infant in episode 5. She seems a little strange, she's into bugs and seems very introspective. It's hard to say exactly what's going on with her from a scene where she's holding a centipede, but she does appear to be different from her brothers in some way, and her uttering "he'll have to close an eye to herself" is something that you might want to remember from this scene. This could be hinting that there's more going on with her, but we'll have to wait and see. The Kingsguard brings Aemon to his mother, and when she finds out about the pig, she goes to tell Viserys. And you can't miss the fact that she tries to lay all the blame on the Velaryon boys. She takes things a step further when she tries to broach the subject of them being bastards, something that the king has already forbidden her from doing in the past. She says to have one child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult to the throne, to Viserys, to the Velaryons, and so on. And the part that really sucks about this is that she's not really wrong. I'm no expert in genetics in our world, let alone in any fictional world. And this is a complicated situation since Laenor has Baratheon blood through his mother Rhaenys. But if we're just thinking about perception, having 3 boys in a row that don't favor their black father would raise questions. After Alicent shuts down his argument from his story about a brown foal being born from a black mare that he owned and a silver stallion, the king gets down to the truth of the situation. The consequences of people finding out that Harwin was the father of his grandsons would be dire. If you think this through, he would have to disinherit her. As Lyonel points out to Harwin later, they would have to kill him for his crimes under the laws. And then what about the children? In case you don't fully grasp what's happening, Alicent summarizes the situation with Criston in the next scene. They agree that Rhaenyra flaunts the privilege of her inheritance without shame and expects everyone around her to deny the truth of what they plainly see. And Viserys has decided to pretend it isn't happening. Criston goes a little too far in his rant to establish just how much he hates Rhaenyra, and that gives Alicent a chance to explain how she justifies her actions. She needs to believe that in the end, honor and decency will prevail, and they need to stick to that and to each other. This seems important, considering that these two are moving in the direction of being characters who are not necessarily wrong, but still manage to be insufferable in the way they go about things. The scene hints that she sees herself as having the moral high ground, but when she walks in on her eldest son jerking off in what looks like the same window Tommen walked out of in season 6, it stands out that with her own family, she chooses to ignore some of the things that are going on. Instead, she brings up that point, the seed that her father planted in her, that if Rhaenyra ascends to the throne, her sons' lives will be in danger. And as annoying as the adult version of Alicent is revealing herself to be, this does make the stakes clear, at least from her perspective. In her mind, people who are jockeying for power will question Rhaenyra's claim based on her son's appearances, and that will give her a reason to eliminate the other possible heirs, i.e. Alicent's children. In the time since we last saw Daemon grabbing his niece's face at the wedding feast, he's married Laena Velaryon, and they had twins named Baela and Rhaena. We catch up with them in Pentos, where you get the sense that they're celebrities due to their dragons and Daemon's exploits in the Stepstones. There's a fun scene with him and his wife riding their dragons where we see just how big Vhagar is. Their daughters also had cradle eggs, but only Baela's hatched. This means that they have 3 dragons in their little family at the moment, and this is worth an offer of a free mansion and lands from the Prince of Pentos if they're willing to relocate and make themselves a deterrent for the Triarchy. The couple is split on this. Daemon likes the idea of the simple transaction of riches in exchange for the presence of their dragons. Laena wants her children to be raised with their family according to their birthright and would rather have a Dragonriders end instead of growing old and fat in the middle of nowhere. After Rhaenyra listens in on Laenor Strong complaining to his son about how his indiscretions with her matter for their family and how it puts them at risk, we see that while Laenor is mostly content with their agreement that leaves him free to hang around the palace enjoying the finer things in life while partying with his lovers, he's heard about fighting going on in the Stepstones, and that has him wanting to get back out there to spice things up. Rhaenyra won't hear of it since after Joffrey's birth, she realizes that the rumors about their parentage are swirling around their family, and in the end she pulls rank and commands him as his princess and heir to the Iron Throne to remain at her side. After Laena explains to her daughter Rhaena that she'll have to follow in her footsteps and claim her dragon just as she did with Vhagar, she goes to tell Daemon about Rhaenyra's new son. He puts a finer point on how Harwin being the father is basically an open secret, and there is some interesting stuff going on here that will be important down the road, but I can't help but feel like they downplayed the time they spent with Laena and Harwin based on how this episode ends. She seems to understand that him not really being a present husband or a good father has more to do with him and his feelings about being exiled from his family rather than her, and she says she's made peace with it. At a small council meeting after they discuss the situation with the Triarchy, with her back against the wall, Rhaenyra tries to extend an olive branch to the queen by suggesting that they marry her heir Jace to her daughter Helena. She's right in thinking that this would solve all her problems, and Viserys loves the idea. But even before they get interrupted by Rhaenyra's milk leaking and bleeding through her dress, it's clear that Alicent doesn't have any intention of getting on board with her plan. She makes this plain to the king in the hall afterward, telling him he can follow through with it when she's cold in her grave. Lyonel follows that up by trying to resign his post as Hand of the King, and because he won't say out loud what the shadow that hangs over his house is, Viserys refuses to let him do that. Lyonel has been portrayed as the one person at court that gives the king good advice regardless of how it might benefit him personally, and when Alicent has dinner with his son Larys, they agree that he's now compromised. He can no longer give unbiased counsel to the king because his son and illegitimate grandson's lives could be at stake. There is an interesting parallel baked into this to when Viserys does the exact same thing with Otto, who eventually does come out with the truth. The situation is different because of the immediate stakes that are involved, but we see Alicent run with this idea and use that as a reason why her father should be reinstated. And it's a great touch when Larys points out that he wouldn't be impartial either, And Alicent yells out no, but he would be partial to me. I mentioned how Emma Darcy's opening sequence really put her stamp on her character, and I think this is where it happens with Olivia Cooke's Alicent. And I kind of love the contrast of her big moment coming at the end of a slow boil, and what that says about the differences between the characters. From there, things escalate quickly. Larys goes down to the black cells and offers mercy to 3 criminals for the small price of having their tongues cut out. This felt somewhat gratuitous. I mean, I suppose he's doing this so they can't tell anyone he's behind what they're about to do, but I also wonder if we're supposed to have a sense of him just enjoying being able to do this based on the shots of his face while he's watching. This is juxtaposed with another birthing scene gone wrong. Laena's midwife informs Daemon that there's nothing more he can do. His wife's baby won't come. He's given the same opportunity to try the emergency C-section that Viserys had with Emma, but after he finds out she won't survive, but before he gives an answer, Laena gets up and leaves the room to take things into her own hands. She commands her dragon to end the pain that she's experiencing, and after some tense moments, Vhagar eventually does that as Daemon looks on. Harwin and Lyonel also experience a fiery death. Larys' tongueless assassin set a fire in Harrenhal while they're asleep, and that does them in. Both of these are heart-wrenching in their own way, and both have huge implications. Daemon and Rhaenyra both lost an important person in their life. Viserys is once again without a hand, and it turns out that Larys is way more crazy than you might have guessed, and doesn't personally draw the line at kinslaying. Rhaenyra also decides to move her family to Dragonstone, and gives Laenor permission to bring his paramour along for the ride. We see them arrive, we see a quiet moment with Viserys in his chambers, kissing Aemma's ring, and then we see Larys tell the queen that he took the idea of getting her father reinstated and ran with it. I think she's legitimately surprised that he went as far as killing his family. If anything, I think she was hoping he would do something that would expose the parentage of Rhaenyra's kids. But she did put it out there that she wanted something to happen, and you gotta love how Larys turned that into a situation where he made himself indispensable. I think in an episode that really leaned into her negative traits, we're supposed to interpret this last bit as her not being so far gone, and that she wouldn't expect him to go to these lengths. And it makes for a satisfying place to end the episode. So yeah, I think they mostly pulled off this big time jump. We missed a lot, but that's how the book is too, and so it's keeping with the spirit of things. At the same time, we're getting a clearer understanding of how a lot of these things played out, and much more characterization in some cases. A decade is a long time. You kind of really hear that when Laenor talks about doing his duty and keeping up his end of the bargain for 10 years. Families have been built, time has passed, but we had enough of it when they were younger to be able to follow their progression. Based on looking at his head, and I couldn't tell for sure, but it looks like Viserys' left arm is completely gone at this point. I would say that his condition is continuing to get worse. But again, 10 years is a long time, and it didn't necessarily feel like he would have been guaranteed to last that long at the end of episode 5. I know he looks terrible, but has he gotten progressively worse? Or did things start to improve after Orwell took over as Grand Maester? It's hard to say, but I guess we can suppose that Melos died off screen in between episodes. It's not just you. Every single character is less sympathetic than they were the last time we saw them. Every living character, I guess, since all the ones we lost in this episode were pretty great. They just cleared the board of people who seem to have their hearts firmly in the right place. In a just world, Laena and the Strongs would have survived. The sympathy deficit is a bit more noticeable with Alicent and Criston, but there are enough bad decisions being made to go around. The kids mostly seem sympathetic at this point, so I would say just hold on to that while you can, because this is a generational story, and they're all coming up in the same system that produced their parents and grandparents. And take a close look at what people are doing, because even the ones that think they're righteous are way more looking after their own interest rather than trying to remake that system. I was a little hard on Rhaenyra earlier, and I guess I should clarify that she is just playing the hand she was dealt. It wouldn't have been her first choice to marry a gay man in a situation where she's expected to reproduce and ensure her own line of succession. That was something that she had to go along with to hold on to power that she hasn't yet realized. Having bastard children in her position is still a big risk, though, and we gotta look at some of the immediate effects of that when Jace asked his mother if Harwin was his father. But this is something that makes her flawed rather than something that makes her evil. I think some of the discussion I see around this comes from the viewpoint that the risk to Alicent's children is something that Otto cooked up on his own. But you can't forget that Rhaenys saw the problems of Rhaenyra being the heir for different reasons, as did Lyonel Strong. You could put a lot of the blame on Viserys for not reworking the system to ensure that she could actually rule rather than just naming her heir. You could put blame on Alicent for not accepting her offer to marry Jace and Helena and generally undermining her at court. This could have been a solution that could have helped things, but it doesn't mean you should just let her off the hook for all the decisions she makes either. Viserys' inaction is consistent with his characterization. Alicent's being protective of her children in a situation where she thinks she's been pulled into this family where everyone is against her is consistent with hers. And Rhaenyra's thinking she should be able to do whatever she wants because she was born a Targaryen princess is consistent with hers. This episode made me think about a quote from George R.R. Martin I read in one of the first articles that came out about the show, where he's talking about the story being like a Shakespearean tragedy. He told the interviewer, "There's no Arya, a character everybody's going to love. They're all flawed. They're all human. They do good things, they do bad things. They're driven by lust for power, jealousy, old wounds, just like human beings, just like I wrote them." And what I liked about this episode is that we've arrived at the point where it's clear that none of these characters are of the type you can root for. You can choose sides and people will, but none of the main characters are without things that you'll have to overlook to do that. For me, it doesn't really matter if I like them or where they land on the imagined scale of morality, as long as what they're doing makes sense for the characters they've been presented as. And now that we've reached this point, things can really take off, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode and where things will go if you haven't read the book. And if you have, what did you think about the way things are playing out? They definitely move some things around the timeline here, and it feels like a choice not to spend too much time on Harwin and Laena. So if you want to talk book spoilers, that's fine. Just please add a couple line breaks, put them below the fold so that people won't see them unless they want to. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.